Right. Thank you, Allison. My name is Shannon Martin Roebuck. I'm Executive Director of Bridging Impact, and I am co-hosting today with Allison Cardona. She is the California State Director for the UC Davis Correct Shelter Medicine Program. And we are so excited to have you all here for this week's Community Conversations, where we'll be talking about positive disruption. And I'd like to first start us out with our question of the day, which is, what is something you have learned in this past month? And I will share that I've really been enjoying lots of different posts about Black History Month. And I learned about a young woman who worked on her thesis and researched who founded the Grace Baptist Church in the city of Mount Vernon in New York. So that was really good tracing work she did to research those 5 Black women who started the church. And we'll look at some of the other things that folks have shared here on what they've learned in the past month.
Oh, Shannon, too, I would love it if you would share that resource in the chat. And I have to just say, going on that same theme, I just started watching the 1619 Project on Hulu, and it is so incredibly powerful. The one I watched last night was about music and the history and influence of Black Americans in American music. And yeah, it was just really inspiring and eye-opening. Highly recommend it.
We have one comment on how to count ranked choice votes. And that is on my watch list too, the 1619 Project.
Wait, Shannon, can I ask a question? Nancy, what does that mean? How to count ranked choice votes?
Well, let's ask Nancy Collins. Can you unmute and share with us what you mean by counting ranked choice votes?
Of course. So we just had our board of directors elections. And one of the things that our president wanted to do, because we had so many applicants, was put everybody in ranked choice. So once we received the votes in, then we had to tally who was their first choice, who was their second choice, who was their third choice, so that we could then determine who was going to be an official board member and who was going to be an alternate. It was an interesting learning experience for me. There are fantastic spreadsheets out there to help you with it, but I had to figure that all out first.
Understood. And I believe that's how some states actually hold their elections, right? Very complicated.
Absolutely. There's a couple of them. Yes. It was an interesting exercise. Everybody made it on the board in some fashion or another. We just had to figure out who was on the board and who was alternate.
Okay. And we have someone else here who has learned about creating appropriate audiences for their new marketing campaign. That's always important. I'm someone who's now ethics board certified in the conduct of research involving human participants. That's awesome. Calculating population balance ratios. That is awesome, using that in discussions with staff. Welcome, Robin from Palm Bay, for joining us your first time. All right, we will now open it up for national updates. Please feel free to unmute yourself and share some things with everyone on the call.
Hey, it's Allison here. I'm going to speak for Dr. Sheila Sagerson. I don't know if she's on the call or not, but I'm just posting in the chat a really wonderful webcast this week. If you can make time, register. Dr. Kristen Vitale is an amazing spokesperson, and she's going to be talking about short-term foster programs for shelter cats. And she's a national figure and a very, very interesting woman. And I highly recommend you join us. And if you can't, it will be recorded. So thank you.
Hi,
Oh,
everybody.
hey guys. Oh, go ahead, Jennifer.
Are you sure? Okay. I'll be quick. This is Jennifer from the Humane Society of the United States, and I just wanted to remind everybody of a couple things. Animal Care Expo 2023 is coming up April 3rd through 6th in New Orleans. Today is one of our advanced registration deadlines, so if you'd like to save $50 on that registration, feel free to register today. We'd love to see you there. I'll be sending that link in the chat, and then second, I'll send a second link into the chat. We'd like to welcome anybody on the call to submit any kind of thing you're proud of that your shelter is doing, any cool marketing ideas, anything that you think other shelters and partners can learn from to our social media. And then we'll kind of take a look through the submissions and make sure we share the ones that we think we can be of service to everybody on humanepro.org. So I'll be sharing a link to that social media form as well in the chat that you can submit any of the things that you'd like to highlight that your shelter's doing that others can learn from.
Jennifer, I registered this weekend to go, so I will see you all in New Orleans in April.
Fantastic.
And on that note, we'd like to see you all up here in beautiful Victoria, British Columbia in May for the Humane Canada's 2023 Summit for Animals. Now, you have missed the early bird discount, but I know we're probably going to be having flash sales, which I will update you on as I can. In the meantime, thank you, Allison, for putting it in the chat. The link is there if you're so inclined to register and come on out to Victoria.
To piggyback off of seeing folks, Cuddly would love to see anybody interested in what was formerly called Pet Pantry, now community programs, because we do much more than just pet pantry support. This Friday, we're having sort of an open demo call at 2 p.m. Eastern. So if you ever wanted to learn about, what Cuddly Community Programs is, how we support donations without the pressure of like a one-on-one conversation, now might be a good time. I will drop the link to register in the chat.
Hello, Aurora. Hello, everybody. This is Johnny Jenkins with Companions and Animals for Reform and Equity, aka CARE. I will be actually hosting a webcast on Wednesday at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time called Community Wisdom as it relates to human and animal well-being. So I will be hosting a panel of proximate leaders that CARE is working intimately with in various communities across the country, and welcome everybody to come and engage the conversation, learn who proximate leaders are in our community. So hopefully you can find them in your community to extend human and animal well-being work within your various communities. So, and shout out to Sheila.
Hey, Johnny Jenkins, thank you so much. This is Allison here, and I just posted it too. Is it 7 o'clock Eastern or is it 8 o'clock Eastern?
You know what? I'm in Arizona. I could be completely off. I thought it was 8 o'clock Eastern. Let me double check, and I will make sure that I post it in the clock. But on the registration, where the link is that I just posted, on the correct time will be for your appropriate time zones. That'll probably be way more accurate than me. Thank you, Allison.
Thank you. Thank you. Looking forward
Peace,
to it.
everybody. Thank you. Peace, everybody.
I'll drop it in the chat. My Dog is My Home is having a virtual conference March 21st to 23rd. They're all about keeping pets and people together and co-sheltering. So if you're in the human services or know folks in human services or anyone in animal welfare or animal well-being, should definitely check out this conference, and I'll post it in the chat.
Hi, it's Sarah Miller with Human Animal Support Services, and we're going to be hosting a town hall with Vincent Medley and some of our leaders from our HOSP pilot shelters this Thursday at 5 p.m. Central, and really just talking about the past and present and future of the HOSP project and getting some insights and stories from the leaders involved in it. So I'll drop the link in the chat as well. So thanks, Allison.
Thank you, everyone, for sharing these wonderful updates. I will now pass it along to Allison to introduce our speaker.
Oh, wait a second. I
I'm
think we-
so sorry to interrupt Shannon, Allison, and I think other Allison, but do we have time to do the grant winners for the Maddie's Fun Community Conversations and the Pet Forum?
Sure.
Awesome. I didn't want to interrupt anyone's national announcement, so sorry coming in a little bit late here. I'll go ahead and share my screen and we can get to the winners. Okay, can everybody see that January 2023 prize winners?
You sure can.
Awesome.
Drum roll.
All right, yes, we do the drum roll to ourselves today. So for our community conversations weekly calls, we have 4 winners who are each getting $2,500, and those folks are Kyle O'Neill from Animals in Montana, Cecilia Olveras from Animal Friends in Pennsylvania, Vicky Ramirez from One Health Clinic in Seattle, Washington, and Jenna Reedy from Animal Friends Alliance in Colorado. Are any of those folks on the call? No? Okay, well, maybe they were all on demand winners.
Jenna said she was here.
Oh, she did? Oh, awesome.
Yeah.
Congratulations, Jenna.
And
Oh, and I
Cecilia.
see, yeah, awesome. Congratulations. Well, Irene and I will reach out to you in the coming weeks with information about your awards. And let's go ahead and see who the winner for the Maddie's Pet Forum grant was. All right, so this is one winner of $3,000, and it is Linda Lee from Big Bones Canine Rescue, also in Colorado. Is Linda on the call? Well, I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen. Congratulations to all our winners this month. Again, Irene and I will follow up with you shortly about getting your grant prizes, and keep watching, keep posting in the Pet Forum so your name can be in the winner's circle. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks so much. Allison, can you hear me? I think I'm having some network.
Yes. Yeah, we
instability.
can
Okay.
hear you. We just can't see you. But we
Yeah,
hear
I'm
you
going to keep my
fine.
camera off for a minute because it's saying it's low. But anyway, thank you so much, Amber, and congratulations to all the winners. And now it is my deep honor to introduce Sheila Kouhkan, who will be presenting today. Sheila is the Chief Engagement Officer for Companions and Animals for Reform and Equity, also known as CARE, and is here to bring wisdom and share her experience with us. So welcome, Sheila.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I'm just going to share my screen. Let me know if you can see this. Yes.
Yep.
Oh, wait, hold on. Hold on. Wrong one. 1 second.
No problem. Happens a lot.
Nope.
You want,
So
are you,
perfect.
would you like us to share it? I could do
No.
a PowerPoint. Okay. Yeah,
That's
take your time.
okay. Thank you. Here we go. Y'all see my
Excellent.
screen? Perfect. Okay, so like Allison said, I'm Sheila Donya Kouhkan, the Chief Engagement Officer for CARE. I'm so excited to be here. I've been able to join these calls in several different capacities, but really excited to come and speak around disruption, and specifically positive disruption. So I know that there's kind of a negative connotation that comes with the word disruption or disruptor. So my key goals today are really to look at disruption, look at the definitions, kind of the root of it, and switch up the negative associations with it, like looking at it as an interruption or a distraction. Instead, I want to see it as a catalyst for change. And so in the spirit of disruption, if you have any questions or anything throughout, please feel free to throw them in the comments, or I'm okay if the hosts are okay with y'all just raising your hands and speaking up. Please, this is totally a dialogue I want to have together. But once we talk about disruption a little bit and flip the definition on its head, I want to talk about how we can implement this to change more lives. So first, a little background on me. I was born to two Iranian academic immigrants. They were refugees during the Iranian Revolution and came here to the United States. And I would say I'm very much born with the heart of an activist and of an advocate. However, over the years, as I grew up with societal pressures, I think I kind of got more quiet, and I learned to only speak when I was spoken to or when I was asked a question. And I was told to be smaller, and especially, in the post 9/11 America. And then I think as women, sometimes especially, we are told to kind of be polite, and that'll in turn override our intuition. And so when we lose our intuition, we might lose the reasons we want to speak up, especially in this industry. If something's not feeling right, we might be hesitant to say something. So I noticed that for myself, especially. And what's interesting is growing up, I knew I wanted to be a voice for the voiceless, as so many of us, right? Like I knew I wanted to speak on behalf of animals, but what I didn't realize was that over time, I had become voiceless myself. So if I don't have a voice and I don't feel empowered to speak up, how can I encourage other people to do so on behalf of other beings? And because I've seen my hesitation to speak up and be a disruptor, I've seen how it's impacted human and animal lives. So I've seen maybe families who surrendered their pets who didn't necessarily need to because I didn't speak up with a solution that I had identified. So I'm finding my way as a disruptor, and I wanted to show kind of how I'm doing it and how I encourage you all to as well. And as we do this, I want us to give ourselves some grace. It's a learning opportunity. And as with any learning opportunity, there's 3 phases, right? There's the awkward phase. So if you think about it, when some of us learn to walk, there's the awkward phase, the cognitive phase, where you are stumbling, you're tripping, you're trying to get up, but you get back up every time you fall down. Then there's the mechanical phase, the associative phase, which is when you're concentrating, you know what you're supposed to do, you know your goal, but you're not as consistent and you're not as efficient, but you're working your way through it, right? And you're putting one leg after another. And then there's the automatic or the autonomous phase, which is how we are today, walking, speaking, everything that we've learned, it's consistent and it's effective. And so I'm going there with my journey into disruption, and I think that we'll all get there together for sure. So the main thing I want to say really with disruption is, and with any growth journey, is that it's a little bit uncomfortable, and there are moments that we might be uncomfortable with together. So I implore you all to get comfortable with being uncomfortable with me and kind of like shake it off, and we'll dive into it. So disruption, historically, it is defined as a break or interruption in the normal course or continuation of some activity or process. If you want to look at it kind of more in the workplace, it could be defined as a change in the dialogue with conversations that may not necessarily be comfortable. So like I said, we're getting uncomfortable with being uncomfortable. We're getting comfortable with being uncomfortable. But what I think is really important to look at these definitions is none of them really have a negative connotation. None of them really say that it's a means of holding things back or a lack of progress. If anything, we should look at the positive nature of them. And I think the best examples we have for that are looking at nature. So looking at the 4 seasons, looking at how the winters result in beautiful springs, right? And I think that that's such a good example. Like without those April showers, we wouldn't have May flowers. So if you ever feel hesitant to be disruptive, I think about nature and think about how it grows and blossoms and internalize that. So looking at it with this positive lens, I want to look at some disruptors over time, past and present. So I'll let you take this all in, some major faces and names up here. So all of these individuals have disrupted systems over time, and it's all resulted in positive changes, but they all did it in different ways, right? Like it wasn't that they all had legislative backgrounds or they all hit the streets and started protesting, but they had different ways of serving as disruptors. So if you look at RBG, she obviously used her work behind the scenes with the Supreme Court to enhance things for humans moving forward in the United States. And then there's MLK, who is highly regarded as a nonviolent activist. And I think when people think of disruption, they think of someone who's really assertive and in your face. And he's a great example of someone who actively called people to fight against the status quo. And anytime you are going against the status quo, you're essentially being a disruptor. And he was criticized for his nonviolent resistance. So I don't know if you've all read his letter from a Birmingham jail. I highly recommend you do if you haven't. And I'll go ahead and post some of these references in the forum afterwards as well. But he basically said that one is morally bound to resist unjust laws, and also essentially that unjust law is no law at all. And with this mindset of how we are morally responsible to disrupt, I think we can use that view a lot in our day-to-day lives. And I also want to specifically highlight the Mahsa Amini portrait in the bottom. So this is the largest feminist revolution going on right now in Iran. So my heart is with my sisters out there fighting it. And they've been in the streets, and their main vessel, or the way that they are doing their disruption, is through the removal of the symbol of the hijab. But what they're really fighting for through that symbolism is to uplift their society as a whole and strengthen society. And so they're, of course, the government views them as disruptors, but I think there's also passive ways of disruption that we're seeing. And I don't know if anyone saw at the Grammys last night, but this songwriter, Shervin, won the first ever Best Song for Social Change award. And he is a songwriter who wrote a song for support for the Iranian women. And I think that's an interesting example too, because it's, you wouldn't think of songwriting really as disruption sometimes, right? But artists, everything is a form of disruption. And I was really excited. So I'm going to go ahead and give that a little bit of confetti, because I was really proud of him. And I have some other exciting confetti and mic drops throughout. So hope you enjoy them. But yeah, so I think that that's a really good example. And then we'll look a little bit closer to home at disruptors in animal welfare. So I'm not sure if you all recognize on the far left, but that's Rich Avanzino. And he's a legend. And if you haven't heard his story, maybe we have time, we can share it at the end. But it's due to him speaking up and going against what was the norm that millions of animals have been saved today. And then the same, Lil Bub, someone might not see a little cat as a disruptor, but Lil Bub and Lil Bub's pet parents became such activists that they really stood up and changed things for special needs animals. And then, Jane Goodall and Betty White, also icons. And something that I would say that all these individuals have in common is that they all really disrupted through love. And it was through love for themselves and animals and themselves and humans that they were able to lead such a difference. So I think we should always look at love as a disruption as well. Which, of course, I think in this space, when so many of us are working for these beings outside of ourselves, we are leading with love for human and animal well-being. So you're thinking probably, okay, these are huge shoes to fill. How do we disrupt? How do we disrupt the status quo? And the first thing I would say, well, I did a little 4-step recipe for you. So we'll look at that in a few examples in a bit, but we are going to analyze data. So I think it's really important to look at qualitative and quantitative data. And when we're in this industry, we're so lucky that we have incredible data resources. We heard from Shelter Animals Count last week, where we have great access to really wonderful quantitative data, but there's also a ton of qualitative. We have anecdotal stories that we hear every day. We have our peers, we have potential adopters, we have all kinds of stories that we're hearing and feeling, and we're a very compassionate industry. So the things we feel have importance, right? So we use that to then identify the issues that we want to solve, and then we identify opportunities. So the opportunities that we might be identifying are likely going to be having to be reprogrammed through disruption. So luckily in this industry, with the history of disruption, we know that we can constantly adapt and change our programs and unpack these new programs and implement them. And one thing that we don't like to hear as disruptors is that this is how we've always done it, right? Like, this is how I've always done my operations. This is just how it is. That's not something disruptors want to hear. And so we're always going to look for opportunities in creating and unpacking these new programs. And as we are adjusting and implementing these programs, it's really important to ask ourselves, are we doing this with a welfare focus or a well-being focus? So I say this because a welfare focus insinuates that there is a dependency or a hierarchy of sorts. When we move towards well-being, we're operating with the concept that individuals, human and animal, are holistic, autonomous beings, and instead we're working towards a collective goal through love, support, and justice. So it's really important to constantly look back and say, okay, is this a well-being measure instead of, is this welfare? And that might be a lot. So I'm going to give an example, a big one, volunteer programs. So I'm hearing anecdotally over time, especially since 2020, that staffing is low. It's hard to hire people and retain staff. It's hard to find volunteers. People feel overwhelmed. People are tired. There's a lot of animals coming in and not as many leaving as quickly. So what is this, right? And then the data is supporting that. This is a 2022 Gallup poll that shows that volunteerism has been trending downwards ever since 2017. So you might think, well, yeah, we had a global pandemic, right? But it's showing that it's even lower and trending downwards from 2020 as well. So a disruptor would say, okay, well, how do we figure this out? How do we get more volunteers? What are we missing? We're going to look at the barriers. And 1 second. So a barrier could be lack of engagement. Where are you recruiting individuals on? Are you on social media? Is it a newsletter? Do people have to find you to find engagement opportunities? Are you doing it in different languages? There's different ways of engaging, right? Are we engaging within our communities, or are we staying kind of in our facilities and reaching outwards? There's the lack of opportunity. Do you have opportunities for people who might not speak English? Are there opportunities for people with religious or cultural barriers that keep them from coming into the facility, but still want to help animals? Are you able to offer opportunities after hours or something for people to do when they're not in the facility? These are all different ways to look at opportunity. There's also, of course, the lack of ability for an agency to train or manage. When you're making life and death decisions and having animals come in, who has the time to train new volunteers, especially if, you know, it might not be for everybody, right? You know, sometimes people reach out and then they think it's going to be cuddling cute puppies and kittens, and then they don't stay. But if you look at it as instead, maybe there are ways that we can train individuals who are handling animals, and then different training programs for individuals who are helping, you know, build dog beds or other options that might be out there. We might be making things more difficult on ourselves with this scarcity mindset. And then there's the lack of accessibility. So is your facility accessible? Is it available for everyone? Can someone with a wheelchair be on site? Or also, if someone doesn't have a car, how can they still volunteer without having to come to your facility? So reimagining volunteerism through this disruptor lens. Here are a few things that you could do. Instead of focusing on community outreach and engaging in that way, focus on community inreach. Reach out to your communities who might already be doing these programs that you're trying to find volunteers for. There are likely proximate leaders who are these subject matter experts in their own communities who are doing the work. And instead of going to them and asking for volunteers for, you know, a program that you might have on site or that you've identified a need for, ask them what they need. Ask them what they need volunteers for. And they likely have their own network of volunteers that they can help with you through partnership. And then there's, of course, moving away from this facility-centric approach. So a lot of our volunteer programs tend to look at dog walking or cleaning cat cages or socializing cats. So instead of focusing on that convenience of having people come to you, we all know disruption is a little bit, you know, inconvenient at times because it's growth and there are growing pains. Go out to the community and see if there's other options that can happen there. You know, you might have someone who works 3 jobs but still wants to help. Find opportunities for them. There might be a single mom who doesn't have time to come on site. Find an opportunity for her. It could be things like cutting newspapers or making felt blankets or anything. And then also engaging with all the different generations and the tools that they have available. We have virtual and remote opportunities that would be perfect for Gen Z who are coming on the scene and digital to like the max, right? So they could help Photoshop. They could create social media posts for you. They could do, you know, microchip lookup. I know myself, I love true crime and I love Google stalking anyone. And so I would love opportunities to help get a pet back home if it resulted in a little bit of Google stalking, right? So let's, instead of looking at things as, well, we've always done it like this, look for these other virtual, remote, community-centric approaches to volunteerism. So that's my first example for you. I don't know if there's any questions. I will move on. The next example, and this one is a little bit uncomfortable, so bear with me because we're going to have maybe some growing pains here together, but looking at implicit bias. So like I said, we have incredible data available to us. And in last week's Shelter Animals Count presentation, we saw that 4% more animals are entering the shelters than left in 2022. And as a disruptor, one might look at that and say, okay, what's the difference here? What are we missing? Is it the applications? Is it the process? And something that CARE did was we did a project Implicit with Harvard, where we studied the implicit bias that could exist in this industry. And we looked at the demographics, and I apologize, this might be a little hard to read. I'll send out the project to everybody after this, but we saw that 84% of animal welfare is white. And then 84% of it is women. So when there's not a ton of representation, it's natural that there's going to be implicit bias. And I think the first thing to say there is implicit bias exists everywhere, right? Like it's actually something that is human cognition. And it's something that why we lean towards things that are similar to our own. Like this quote says, we don't see things as they are, we see things as we are. So, an example of implicit bias, the founder of FUBU says this story, and I say this all the time, and it's interesting to hear people's different takes on this, and I'm curious what this audience thinks today. But LL Cool J, at the height of his career, wanted to do an ad, right? And well, they approached him to do it for Gap. And he said, yeah, I'll do an ad for Gap, but I have to wear this hat. I'm insecure about my shape of my head. And so Gap was like, sure, of course, you can wear the hat. So they do the ad. He makes a ton of money, but for a different brand, because the hat he was wearing was FUBU, which is a BIPOC owned brand. And the people at Gap did not realize that FUBU was a different brand. And therefore they had basically spent a ton of money to make an advertisement for a different company. And I think right there, it's a good point of why representation matters, because the people who were in that space were seeing things as they are and not able to see because they didn't have representation at the table. So we can talk about that. It is interesting. I mean, there was great perks, right? Both brands at the end of the day got some advertisement out of it, but I don't think Gap really wanted to pay for another brand to advertise for them. So looking at implicit bias and how to break this bias, first we need to understand why these barriers might exist. Where might implicit bias live in our adoption practices and our fostering practices and all of that? It could be that there are barriers created for age restrictions. So why do we have certain age restrictions for different types of adoptions or getting animals out of the shelter? Looking at the volunteerism from the last example, why do we have age restrictions? Bye. Like, why do we have age restrictions for volunteers when maybe they're just doing things remotely, right? If you're not handling animals, you really have to be over a certain age. So reassessing those reasonings there. There's also, of course, ageism that might exist and concerns around adopting out to elderly communities. So looking at those and why they might exist and reassessing them in our own programs. And you might have exclusion of community. You might be excluding marginalized communities or BIPOC communities. So looking at how we can include more community, there might be entire groups of people that have never been approached to adopt or help animals get out of the shelter. Again, lack of representation, like I said earlier, and why it's so important to have more heads at the table. And then language barriers. If adoption applications are in English, might some things get misconstrued if someone's trying to translate or don't have translation services? And really, does an animal not deserve to be with a home, or does a person not be able to have the companion love that we all know if they don't speak English, right? So these are just some barriers that could be identified through this disruption lens. And I think what's really interesting is we have a great example of how this has worked by reducing implicit bias. I don't know if there's anyone from Humane Indiana on the call. If there is, I would love to hear from you all, but they did our certification, which is called Racial Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion. And I'm just going to read what they said in their feedback. It was a grant they received from Pet Finder. And they said, putting into practice the knowledge learned from READY, Humane Indiana was able to increase the number of families fostering pets by 25%, We were able to involve families from communities where the animals were found. So that's what I said about including community, which tend to be predominantly BIPOC because we removed barriers to participate. We were even able to use software to better involve people whose preferred language is not English. This in turn allowed us to accept additional transports of puppies on the euthanasia list from other shelters that have low resources but high numbers. This is especially significant because we had received other grants to publicize the foster program and invested a significant amount of money in marketing, but had not seen an increase in the number of foster families, even after a year. Changing ourselves first led to an immediate result that helps us have even more of a life-saving impact. So what I think is so interesting there is that they looked inward first and they were able to save animals, but what's different there is they had a measure that was something that's always been done, right? A marketing grant, like it's wonderful. We can always look at new ways to market, but something that had never been tried was this, breaking bias in their own programs. And because of that, they saved 6,500 more animals. So this just shows through positive disruption, the difference that can be made for both people and pets. So my last example is going to be around access to care. So I think we've been talking a lot about access to care as an industry and how the access to care gap exists. And it's often discussed around the terms of financial access or equitability, but instead there's also the whole factor that we have limited veterinarians out there. And if you were able to see my CEO, James Evans, and my colleague, Mariluchan Rasmi, did a presentation a few months ago, and they talked about partnership, not servitude. And I think the biggest thing here is partner with communities and see what is needed preventatively in order to keep animals in their homes and set them up for success instead of servitude, which I think what's really interesting is James, our CEO, says, we might argue that underserved communities are just being served the wrong thing because we're not asking them really what they need. So I wanted to play a really quick video. Hopefully you can hear the sound. Just a cute song, but I want to show an example of how we can disrupt access to care and by including the community, have a preventative access to care program. So to keep myself from crying, I'm just going to give myself a mic drop for that one, because I don't know, it's just so emotional. It's so nice to see. And I think of, you know, my younger self, and if only I could have made some of the decisions and disrupted the ways I would like to do now. So I hope these examples helped you all and showed you how you can be a positive disruptor in your own spaces, whether it be personal or professional lives. If you're hesitant, I think just a few tips for you all as you lead into your disruptive nature is just be curious, lead with your curiosity. No one's going to be upset if you're asking questions, looking at quantitative and qualitative data, trying to get answers, especially if you're trying to save more animals. And be brave, because sometimes people might not want to be uncomfortable with you. And then be authentic, because if you're serving with your authentic self, then that space is, you know, going to be really productive for humans and animals. And then be open-minded with yourselves, and be open-minded with your teammates who might come to you and have an idea of how to disrupt the status quo, and be open-minded with your past self. Like I think about myself and I have photos of some of the animals that maybe I couldn't save. And I'm just thinking, okay, well, we're making a difference now. So I give myself that grace. And that's all I have. If anyone has any questions.
So beautiful. Thank you, Sheila.
Thank you.
I think we do. Nadia, did you want to ask your question?
Hi, yes. Great presentation, Sheila, and good to see you. So I wanted to ask, what recommendations would you give to organization leaders to support any disruptors in their organizations? You know, certainly when workspaces are not psychologically safe, employees might not feel safe or comfortable disrupting. So just want to hear from you what you would recommend for those situations.
I think the biggest thing, and especially things that I would say again to my younger self, is build a community of disruptors and support each other. It's hard to go about it ourselves, and I'm hoping in this presentation, it doesn't have to be a colleague within your own, you know, workplace. It could be a colleague on this call. When you know you're not alone and you have a community and a culture that you're building, it's easier to move forward that way. But, you know, also don't focus on what's always popular. And sometimes what you think might be perceived as popular is pretty unpopular, but people are just looking for another solution. So if you just keep moving forward, and like I said, with authenticity and openness and in a positive way, then I think people will at least hear you out and be open-minded.
Sheila, it looks like Anne also has a question if you want to unmute.
Hi, Sheila. Thank you so much for this presentation. There are so many of us out here, not a part of an organization, kind of on the outside, advocates, community advocates. I've been advocating for 9 years for changes at our publicly funded shelter. And I've been labeled, you know, as a disruptor, I guess, in a negative way. I see myself as a change agent. I think we need to have a jobs alike group for people in this position. And if Maddie's Fund can do anything to facilitate that, or your group, I think that would be very helpful to share our experiences. I feel like I'm moving forward now more so than I have in the previous 8 years. I have support from elected officials, but it's still a long journey to go to transform a shelter from, it's not really high kill, but it's not what we see at our other local shelters like Humane Rescue in DC and Barks in Baltimore and other things. I mean, and these experiences have really been so enabling for me. I really appreciate what Maddie's Fund and all these groups are doing for us. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne. I love that. I think, you know, it's tough, I think, especially if you're going through it by yourself. And I commend you, because that's not easy if you're not able to immediately build that community. But I think it'd be great if we start a community disruptors. In fact, shameless plug, as a Chief Engagement Officer for CARE, I am working on making a network of change makers where we can all work together to identify solutions and help our peers in this industry and outside of this industry to be change agents. So please reach out to me if you would like to join our change makers circle.
Sheila, we have a question from Carolina that says, I would like if you can give us an example of the difference between thinking from a welfare perspective and a well-being perspective.
Absolutely. So I would say exactly looking at that last video that we had, if we were approaching the needs, and a lot of this video was shot in the northern tier with Indigenous partners in the Red Lake area, and a traditional animal welfare sense would probably say, oh, well, here, let's just get these handouts and give it to this community. We don't know what they need. We don't know what kind of preventative care. We might even go in there and take their animals out of that community because we'll say, well, they don't have the resources to take care of them. So I'm going to take those animals and put them in this rescue group. Instead, from a well-being standpoint, let's look at how we can keep those pets with their families. And you might have seen in that video, some of those dogs don't have collars, they're not on leashes, but they're loved, right? So if you're leaning with that love and observing that love, then we would say, okay, from a well-being standpoint, how can we provide them what they need to make sure this animal is healthy and thriving, and leaving our own biases behind around, okay, I mean, I have my dog, she's on my background. I have so many custom pieces of work, but I don't judge anyone as a pet parent if they don't have that, right? So we all have different ways of being pet parents. And so the well-being viewpoint is just looking at that individual and that animal and seeing what's best for them. And listening when they tell you what's best for them.
Thanks, Sheila. I think it's also, you mentioned this at the beginning of the presentation, but someone commented that disruptors carry such a negative connotation, and why not use the term contributors? Make personal contributions to make change. And I thought it was important for you to address that.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that they can be synonymous, but the difference with disruption is identifying that there's something that has to be changed, right? Like that there's something that the status quo can't masquerade as a positive thing anymore, especially here when we have access to so much incredible data and we can see with all the incredible work everyone is doing and with all the positive intentions that we have, there are still animals who might still be dying for space. And how can we fix that? And as a contributor, I wouldn't want to say that I'm a contributor to that issue. I would rather say I'm changing it. I'm making it a positive thing and I'm a catalyst for change.
And it looks like we have time for one more question. It looks like Michelle has a question. Do you want to unmute, Michelle?
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I volunteered down here in South Georgia with a shelter, small municipal animal shelter, little over a year, and really tried to make a lot of change through fact-based information. Got a huge amount of pushback. Long story short, eventually through the administrator who oversee the shelter, I was banned from the shelter for trying to help. Any thoughts as to how to work against or work with these people to get change to happen, to help not only the shelter, but the community?
I think something that's really difficult is we all spend times, whether it's in personal relationships in our workplace, we want to do our due diligence and give things the opportunity to change. And if they don't, you might have to build it yourself and show them the example of hey, this is where I was headed. You can come where I'm headed and I'm happy to work with you. But at the end of the day, if I can't work with you, I'm going to have to make that change elsewhere, which is an example, we saw that with Black Wall Street. Right? Just creating opportunities ourselves. So it's really difficult. And I would say it could feel isolating. And I'm sorry that you're going through that, but know that you have a community here that can support you in creating that future.
Well, I just have to say, first of all, I love this presentation, but you just validated everything for me, because what I actually did was I formed Pals for Paws of Georgia, because I felt that if I couldn't help the shelter from the inside, I would help from the outside by helping the community.
I think that's a perfect way to do it. Keep me posted. Let me know how it goes and how we can support your disruption, which sometimes disruption has to happen from the outside. I don't know if anyone, I keep talking about the Grammys, but I don't know if anyone saw Lizzo's speech. She said as an outsider, she just kept looking at it from the outside, and finally she made a difference by making her own positive music, right? So, you know, look at things from the outside until we become the inside.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Sheila, I don't think we could close with a more beautiful saying than what you just said. Thank you so much for an incredible presentation. And just to everyone, think about where you've been a disruptor in your life and where you can be one going forward. Thank you all. This will be, the recording will be on Maddie's Pet Forum. Sheila will be continuing the conversation with us on Maddie's Pet Forum. And thank you so much, and hope you have a beautiful disruptive week.
Thank you. Remember to disrupt. Thanks, everyone.